Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome to another video. Today I have a video I have been anticipating filming but I'm very scared to do because this is just going to be a massive video. So I am going to be ranking all of the 115 books I read in 2023. I can't believe I read so many. I do have a full-time job. To be honest, the way to read them all, and I could do a video on this if anybody's interested, but I read a mixture of formats. I read physical, ebook and audio. I do count audiobooks as books to move with my reading goal, and you should too. I count graphic novels, I count novellas, but most of these are in the main full-length novels. I just fit in reading whenever I can, and I really try to make extra time for reading in 2023, and it paid off because I went from 56 books in 2022 to 115 in 2023. So what I'm going to be doing for this video is ranking all of the books from the worst to the best. Now I do want to give the caveat that just because I think a book is bad or good doesn't mean that you should, and these books at the bottom, there is so an audience for them, it's just I wasn't that audience. Also, because there's so many books to talk about, I'm going to be giving very brief reviews for each of these books. If you want to read my full thoughts, because I do post relatively lengthy Goodreads reviews, you can head to the description and click on my Goodreads link and follow me on there so you can read all the reviews of these books if you want anything in more detail. So first up, there's a couple of books I didn't rate because I didn't feel it was appropriate, so I'm just going to briefly talk about these even though these are not at the bottom of the pile. First up we have Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, which I listened to on audiobook while it was free on Audible. I don't feel a need to rate this, A, because I do not think that J.K. Rowling needs any more press or anything like that, but also because it's a book that was so important to my childhood, it feels really weird to rate it now, so I just didn't rate it. And then the second one is Britney Spears' memoir, The Woman in Me. I do often rate memoirs, and I have several memoirs, biographies, etc. that I read this year that I have rated, but I don't feel that I can rate this one. It's just the nature of the subject content is so harsh, but there's a lot of like comments about the writing style and stuff like that online. I think everyone should read or listen to this, but I don't really want to pass any kind of judgment. But I do think it's an important book. I think it's worth your time. If you like biographies, you will probably enjoy this, but this particular one I just felt weird about rating. So now let's get into books that I have rated from here up. And as I say, these books at the bottom, it does not mean that you won't enjoy them. There's absolutely no shade or anything to any of these authors. It's just these books weren't for me. Okay, that's the important thing. I've also ranked these books today more based on my feelings or how much I remember them. This is not necessarily how I actually rated them on Goodreads. I just thought it was easier to rank them based on kind of what my feelings are today. I think that this could change on any given day, stuff could move around. So kind of take this list with a pinch of salt, but at least it's kind of roughly in order. Next up we have A Concert for Christmas by Helen Hawkins, which is an ARC I got from NetGalley. I did join NetGalley this year and read a lot of NetGalley books. I actually want to reduce the number that I read next year, or at least be more choosy with the ones that I chose, as a lot of the arcs are towards the bottom of this list. So in this one we have Sophie, who is putting on a concert for Christmas, and Liam is the musical director, and they kind of develop feelings for each other, even though there's some kind of complicated background story there where Sophie went on a date with him, really hated the date for, in my opinion, unreasonable reasons. Like, how is he supposed to know she'd hate balloons? And then he ends up being the musical director and she's still like, oh my gosh, that's the guy that gave me the balloons. And then they end up kind of falling for each other while they're doing this concert. It had Christmassy feelings, definitely, but I just felt with this one, like, the reasons for disliking Liam I didn't really get, and I didn't particularly like Liam. He had a really angry personality, and I do not like that in romance books, so this just was not for me. Next up we have Recipe for Mr. Banksy by Annie Rose. This is about somebody who runs a salon, and the guy is a doctor but also does graffiti, and they end up kind of from very early on in the book developing feelings for each other. And then it's just kind of about how that story unfolds. And this one, I just think the writing style just wasn't for me. It was an interesting premise for a story, kind of, but the graffiti didn't really play into it very much, which makes it a little bit weird for the name of the title. It has nothing to do with recipes or cooking. And they fell for each other really early on in the book. I think they sleep together really early on, maybe, but I might be wrong in saying that. But it meant that there was just no will they, won't they. I just didn't. This one just didn't work for me in terms of pacing. Next up, the first physical read on this list is Bell's Tale Beauty and the Beast manga by Mallory Reeves. This one is just the story of the Beauty and the Beast told in manga form. It's based on the film with Emma Watson rather than the original. And really my main reason for disliking this is the quality of the print in the book is really poor. And for a book that cost me like £19, it's really, really rubbish to have really blurry art. Like, it actually would be better for me to read it on camera. It's clearer than me trying to actually read it physically in person. I just felt it was really disappointing. Obviously, I like the story of Beauty and the Beast. It's my favourite film, but I just don't feel that it was served well in this particular manga form. I do own the second one. I'm hoping I can read it in 2024 and then just leave this series behind me. Next up, we have an audiobook, Death at Wentwater Court by Carola Dunn. I'm pretty sure this is free on Audible if you do want to listen to it. I listened to it just because I needed something when I ran out of books to listen to while we were on our cruise in Norway and I couldn't get good enough signal to download anymore. This one is about a woman who is visiting a posh house to do some photography and then a murder happens, and rather than leave the police to it, obviously in typical cozy mystery style, she gets involved and really tries to take over. I did not enjoy the audio narration for this one, so it's not necessarily a comment on the book. The audio narrator is American, which for a really, really British book just felt really odd. I wasn't invested in the story. I couldn't really remember who was who in terms of remembering like who died or who didn't die and who all of the suspects were, and I just felt like the kind of taking over of the police. This is a sort of historical mystery, and so there was still an element of like women can't do this, and it just wasn't for me. I would potentially carry on listening to it if I really needed like complete background noise that I wasn't really listening to. Maybe I'd listen to the next in the series, which I think is also free. There are many in this series as well, so it's a shame it didn't work for me, but I've read better cozy mysteries, which we'll talk about. Next up, we have Like a Curse by Elle McNichol. This is the sequel to Like a Charm, which I read earlier in the year and is rated much higher on this list. This is about Ramya, who lives in Edinburgh, and one day she realizes that where she always thought she was different and an outcast, it actually is that she has magic. And I think that this series is very suitable for middle grade, which is who it's meant for, especially the first one. I did really enjoy it. The second one I listened to on audio, and I think I didn't enjoy the audio experience as much, but also I just didn't feel a need for this story and in the sequel. And Ramya was so whingy and rude to everybody, and I just really didn't like her. I do think the author tried to address some of that towards the end of the book, but I just liked Ramya a lot more in the first one. I just found her really difficult to be around in the second one. Next up, we have The Witch is Back by Sophie M. Morgan, which was another arc that I read. This is about a female main character who has to have a forced marriage with her friend from when they were younger, who just up and left when he found out that they were like tied to be together forever, and then he comes back like 10 years later trying to save his family, and he thinks that the way to save them is for them to get married. I did not like the relationship between these two. It just was like, why are these two being together? I don't feel that this relationship is going to work. I didn't really like the way they spoke to each other. Just not particularly enjoyable for me. Next up, we have My Heart in Braille by Yoris Chamberlain, which is a graphic novel I read for free via NetGalley. This is the shortest book I read this year. It's only 78 pages. And the art is enjoyable, but I just did not get on with the story for this one. It's about a girl who is going blind and a guy at school who kind of helps her to overcome this by like cheating for her, and like on tests and exams and stuff. And I love the premise of it, but I just felt like it did not work. The story had kind of dips in plot which I just didn't understand. I couldn't really keep up with where we were at. Don't know if there was something to do with the translation from French into English, but yeah, unfortunately, given how short this one was, I think it needed to be longer in order to enjoy it, and also it just didn't give me enough time to get on board with the romance between these two. Next up, we have Off the Charts Chemistry by Christine Miles, another arc I read. I'm really struggling to remember what this one is about, and I actually looked it up already earlier. And I'm still struggling. So I actually rated this one higher on Goodreads, but I think I'm gonna have to drop it because I just don't remember. I think it is about a teacher and a football coach at school who end up in a relationship together, but I just can't remember the premise, and even with reading the synopsis again, I didn't remember. Then we have A Winter Wedding at Starcross Manor by Christy Barlow. This was another arc I read via NetGalley. This is part of a series. I think this one isn't the first one, but I can't remember. But I think the main character's name is Libby, but I'm struggling to remember. And she ends up falling in love with a guy who has a child. I'm struggling to remember masses about this one. When you read 115 books, it's bound to happen. But I think I just wasn't quite on board with the writing style. There were some cute moments though. She helps her brother out at the Starcross Manor when his wedding planner like quits unexpectedly, and he calls on her to come and help out and to put on this like wedding of the season for their brochure so that they can get some much needed publicity. We got back there. But yeah, this one was okay. It was just the writing style didn't quite work for me, and I decided that I would DNF the rest of the series, so that's why it's kind of rated around here. Then I've kind of put these three together because honestly it's hard to differentiate between them, but these are 3 Agatha Raisin books that I read this year, which is by MC Beaton. It's a cozy mystery series. I kind of would deem it in a way sort of the original cozy mystery series. There are many volumes to this, and they're set, well, they start in like 92, and Agatha Raisin moves to this quiet town where she thinks that she's getting away from her busy life in London, and then many people get murdered. I really enjoyed the first one on audiobook. I love the audiobook narrator, but unfortunately the more time we spend with Agatha, the more unlikable she becomes. I don't mind that so much, but my main issue is that this book is of its time, and so there is racism and there's sexism in there, and I just kind of got to a point where I couldn't really be on board with that anymore. I would listen to more in this series if I had them for free. It's like not where I want to spend my Audible credits, but if I could get them really cheap, they often come up in like £1, £2 sales on Audible, so maybe then I would listen to them, but it's just not one that I will be prioritising because I just think it's of its time, and we will probably reach a point where I just have to DNF the series because based on reviews I've read, I don't think that this issues that I have are going to get any better. Next we have The First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North. I read this for a work book club. It's my colleague's favourite book, so I feel really sad saying this. I love the premise of this. It's basically about a guy called Harry who dies, and when he dies he goes back to the beginning of his life and he's born again, and then as he gets older he has memories that he's lived this life before, and this keeps happening, and then somebody visits him on one of his deathbeds and basically says, you're part of something bigger, we need you to try and look into this stuff that's happening to try and fix it and save the world. It's such an interesting idea, but I just found it a real slog to listen to. I don't think it was the ideal way. I basically listened to it in a concentrated like 6-hour period to finish it when I like read it to start with. And I think I needed more time with this book because it's quite complicated, but the ending is also really ambiguous, and I have seen a lot of stuff online that says actually this is a really unsatisfying ending when you've invested this much time in a book. So unfortunately I felt as well really let down by that. Next up we have Sheets, the graphic novel by Brenna Thumler, which I read for free on NetGalley, and I wish I'd loved this more, but I just didn't really get on board with it. I didn't particularly enjoy the story. I didn't particularly love the art, and I know a lot of people really like this, so I really hoped I would. It's about a girl who, she has a really sad life, and I think I just didn't really like reading about that either. I know you do sometimes have to read sad books, but it's not what I would necessarily choose to read. She has a really sad life. Her mum's died, her dad's incredibly depressed, and then she ends up finding this ghost who is kind of somebody from the town that died a while ago, and it's about a kind of unlikely friendship, and I love the idea of it, but the execution just didn't work for me. Next up we have a novella, which is Falling for Her Best Friend by Tammy Franklin, which I just bought completely at random based on the cover, which for some reason really reminds me of Bewitched. I don't know why, but this one is about a girl who moves back to her hometown following a really horrible breakup, and she moves back in with her mum, and her mum lives next door to the girl's childhood best friend, so they kind of rekindle their friendship, and he's been in love with her his whole life. He's still in love with her, but she doesn't realize this, and she ends up getting back with the boyfriend that she was with while she was at high school, and then realizing that maybe she shouldn't have ended up with him. I just think this didn't work in a novella format. I think that it needed to be a bit longer for me to be really invested in these characters, and I don't particularly like love triangles. There was also just like no reason for her to not actually end up with her ex-boyfriend from what I remember. So yeah, I think if this one had been longer maybe I would have enjoyed it more, but unfortunately for a novella it didn't work for me. Next up we have Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Bowdry, which I got an ARC for via NetGalley. This is the sequel to Legends and Lattes, which I read last year and gave 4 stars. I enjoyed it. Not as much as everybody else I don't think, but I did enjoy it. This sequel though, I do not see the point. I can understand it is well written, and I can understand why people would maybe like it, but I just did not see the point in this prequel existing. I didn't feel I gained anything from Viv having this story. I just thought it was pointless, to be honest. I'm really sorry, but I just did not understand this one. And I think there's a real issue with cozy fantasy that it just is unnecessary description, and I just could not get on board with it. I really slogged through to finish it. So I'm sorry I didn't enjoy it, because I know people really like this series, but honestly if any more books came out in this series I don't think I would pick them up now. Then we have European Travels of the Monstrous Gentlewoman by Theodora Goss. This is the second in the Athena Club series. I listened to this on audio. It was the longest audiobook of my life. This is the longest book I read this year. It's 730 pages and there is no need. There isn't. Jade Legacy can be 700 plus pages and that's fine. This book does not need to be 700 plus pages. So basically this series is about kind of the daughters of monsters, like the daughters of Frankenstein, and Sherlock Holmes is in here and Dr. Watson and things like that. I love the idea of it, right? I love the premise of this story, but the way that it's written is by the girls in the future writing a story about their adventures together, and they chip in and they interrupt throughout the book. And that means there are no stakes because you would know if somebody died and none of them are dead. So unfortunately, I just don't understand the love for this series because that part of it doesn't work for me. But I will listen to the third one. I intend to finish out the series because I'm interested enough in what happens. But this one in particular, being 700 pages, was my real issue with it, and that's why it's lower down, because the first one would have been higher up than this. I cannot get on board with a book that not enough happens for it to be 700 pages. Next we have Love Another Risky Business by Sarah Brenton, which is another arc I got from NetGalley. This is about a guy who is a stunt performer and he is in love with his best friend. They celebrate her birthday together every year, but he's a real risk taker and she is the absolute opposite of that. He has an issue at work where he gets into an accident and then she is kind of tasked by his mum to look after him and help him recover. And I just found this one really insulting about the stunt industry. Like, I understand it's dangerous, but people have to do it or none of you would have any action movies. And also, who is this person to like really dictate and stop this guy from doing the career he's literally been working towards his whole life because she thinks it's too dangerous? I just found this one hard to enjoy. I am actually really interested in reading the sequel though, because the sequel is about his best friend and I'm just really interested in the story between him and the girl that he's interested in because you read about them in the first one. This book is incredibly steamy. If you like steamy books, this is one for you. Next up we have Mr. Perfect on Paper by Jean Meltzer. I got this one in Florida, so I'm really gutted I didn't enjoy it because look at that beautiful floppy edition. This one is about Dara, who is the CEO of a dating app but doesn't really have time to date herself. She goes on a TV show to publicize it and this guy is the presenter on the show and her grandma comes on the show with her and ends up producing the list of like what Dara's perfect guy would be like. And Chris, who's trying to save his TV channel, decides that they should do a feature on Dara going on all these dates to try and find her perfect man. She says her perfect man needs to be Jewish and she maybe doesn't end up with somebody Jewish. I love the idea of this, but unfortunately I just didn't love the writing style. The execution of the way that the plot ended up didn't quite work for me, so I'm genuinely gutted because A, I bought it all the way back from Florida, and also that is so satisfying. Then we have Talking as Fast as I Can, From Gilmore Girls to Gilmore Girls by Lauren Graham. This is Lauren Graham's autobiography and I have actually had I should have got the physical one for this actually. I borrowed it from my friend like 6 years ago and I finally listened to the audiobook this year. I love Lauren Graham. I'm a huge Gilmore Girls fan. I've seen it all the way through like 70 times. Like I really love Gilmore Girls. And I thought I would really enjoy this, but to be honest, there's not a lot about Gilmore Girls in it, and anything there is all stuff that's kind of publicly known anyway. It's not like there's some secret drama in here you don't already know about. It just sounds like everyone had a really good time. And a lot of it is like a self-help book, and I didn't really need a self-help book from Lauren Graham. And also I actually don't like Lauren Graham as an audiobook narrator, even though obviously I love watching her on TV. But I did already know that because I listened to a book by her last year, which was my worst book of last year. But I thought it would be better if it was her own book. It wasn't. Then we have one of my biggest disappointments of the year, which is Husband Material by Alexis Hall. Boyfriend Material, which is the first in the series, was one of my favourite books of 2022. I absolutely loved it. This is the sequel where Luke and Oliver are going to a series of weddings and discussing whether the next stage in their relationship should be a wedding or not. And I just felt like I didn't need to know what happened to Luke and Oliver after the first book. I didn't need to read what happened in this. I didn't like the way that it played out. It's such a shame because I love these characters and I will keep reading the rest of the series, I think, because I just don't know if I could let them go because I love Luke and Oliver so much. But yeah, unfortunately I just didn't enjoy this one this much. It was still funny. I don't think it's as funny as the first one, but there were still funny moments. I still think Alexis Hall is an excellent writer. This story just didn't pan out in the way I hoped. We've kind of moved into 3-star territory with the last few books. This one is The Sad Ghost Club by Lise Meddings. This is a middle grade graphic novel about SG, the sad ghost, who is feeling really low and ends up going to a party but doesn't want to speak to anybody because they are kind of suffering from social anxiety, and they end up making friends with somebody else who is there who is also not speaking to anybody, and then it's about them just kind of walking around town this one evening. The art is beautiful. It's some of my favorite graphic novel art. It has loads of really gorgeous scenes of a kind of nighttime Norway-esque town, so it's beautiful in that way, but I just didn't enjoy this story, which is kind of ridiculous because I am a sad ghost. But I didn't feel I found this kinship with the sad ghost. I just found SG really annoying, and I think if I was Socks, the other ghost, I would have been really annoyed with the way that SG was dealing with me. I do have the other 2 books in this series and I would like to read them in 2024 so that I can close this one out. I'm hoping I'll enjoy them more than this one, but we'll see. Next up we have another graphic novel, which is Galaxy the Prettiest Star by Jadzia Axelrod and Jess Taylor. The art in this is absolutely gorgeous. It's let me try and find some like good example, but like it's gorgeous. It's so colourful and angular. It's about somebody who's basically having to live as somebody else on Earth when they should be back at their home planet. Every time I read the blurb of this, I think, yes, this is so good. But unfortunately, the story just didn't pan out how I was expecting. This is a DC Pride comic. I don't have any kind of affinity to this particular DC character. I don't know who they are or anything like that. Maybe it would have helped me if I did. But yeah, unfortunately, I was so gutted to not love this one more because I love the art. Next up we have By the Book by Jasmine Guillory. This is the second in the Meant to Be series where a different author writes each book and they are fairy tale retellings. This is the Beauty and the Beast one, friends. So you can tell it's genuinely gutting if it's this far down on the list. Unfortunately, I just didn't really get on with Jasmine's writing, and that's the main reason why I didn't rate it more highly. I enjoyed the sort of general idea of the story. Basically, Izzy works in a publishing house and she's struggling to make her name there. She agrees to take on the assignment where she goes to Beau's house to help him ghostwrite his biography because he's just not turning it in. He is very grumpy, shutting himself away from the world, and she is sunshine, and in that way it's a Beauty and the Beast retelling. But yeah, unfortunately, I just didn't get on with the writing style for this. So unfortunately, that's why it's rated so low. Next up, we have Love Lessons in Starcross Valley by Lucy Knott. I actually read this on Kindle Unlimited, but I did own the physical copy as well. I love the cover for this book so much. This one is about Marnie, who following a really horrible breakup goes to Canada for a trip, and she meets somebody called Nova over there. When she comes back to the UK, she's really missing Nova, but she's trying to settle back into her life, and then Nova happens to come to this random town in Surrey or something that she's in. And this book was a lot less about the romance and a lot more about Marnie dealing with the grief of moving past her relationship, and a lot about a child that she supports in school who is neurodivergent. If you like that sort of thing, if you don't want romance to be the forefront of what you read, I genuinely think you'll enjoy this. It's well written. It's just, this is not really a romance, in my opinion, and I didn't really want to read a very in-depth, detailed look at how the UK education system fails neurodivergent children, because I have to deal with that as part of my day-to-day work, so I didn't actually want to read about it. Next up we have Pumpkinheads by Rainbow Rowell and Faith Erin Hicks. This is a very loved graphic novel about 2 people who work at a pumpkin farm. I'm really sorry if you can hear the rain, it's really chucking it down outside. I'm hoping it's atmospheric more than anything, but I need to get this filmed. But they work at a pumpkin farm, and this is the last summer that they're going to be working together before they go off to college, and so it's their kind of last adventure, and this character is trying to help this character fall in love with this person that he's kind of been crushing on all this time. I love some elements of this. I think the art is really lovely, and it has these like funny in-jokes with a lot of the signage around the pumpkin farm, but I wasn't particularly invested in the story. I don't really feel like anything happened. I don't really feel it was this like super cozy autumnal thing, so I was disappointed to not enjoy this one more. Next up we have Playing Under the Piano from Downtown to Darkest Peru, I think, by Hugh Bonneville. This is his biography. I listened to this because I've actually been on TV with Hugh Bonneville. I was an extra in a TV series and I got to meet him there. It's a real shame that I didn't enjoy this one because I think Hugh is so likeable. I think he's so likeable in everything he's in. But I just felt like this biography was Hugh trying to be too nice, and then when he was trying not to be nice, it still came across as quite nice, or felt awkward where he was like slotting in swear words, etc., that didn't necessarily need to be there. And there was a lot of name dropping, and I just felt like I was listening to like 6 hours of somebody name dropping their famous friends. So unfortunately I just didn't enjoy this one very much. So we have a new audiobook that I was listening to. This is the second one. The first one I rated higher, but it's the Her Royal Spinner series by Rhys Bowen, which is a cozy mystery series, which is what I prefer to listen to on audio. And it's about Lady Georgiana, who is like 34th in line to the throne, but you wouldn't know it. She's really down on her luck and trying to make her own way in the world. But murders keep happening around her, and she has finding herself having to solve them. And I loved the first one. The second one, for whatever reason, no, in fact, I think this is maybe the third one. Maybe I listened to the first one last year or something. I don't know. I'm now thinking maybe not all of them are in here. But anyway, it's hard to remember, but I really enjoyed the first and second one. But this one is the third one. And I just didn't listen to this one in as much depth as the other two. I was really invested in the story of the other two, and this one I just kind of felt like I blinked and the novel had happened. But I would definitely continue with this series because I love the audiobook narrator. They're really funny. I think they're very like funny English commentaries on society. I just really enjoy them. Next up we have The Midnight Village by Holly Martin. This is on Kindle Unlimited if you want to pick it up. This is about a woman who, following a kind of disastrous career issue, ends up moving to a village that's near where she grew up. And she kind of discovers that there's something different about this village, and the mayor of the town is somebody that she knew from her childhood. So this is a kind of magic witchy story. I loved the idea of this, and I do actually really like Holly Martin, but I just felt like the plot wasn't expanded enough for me. It had such interesting magic lore, and I would have liked it to be more like the Kiss Curse or the X-Hex, which have a lot more magic lore in them, as well as balancing the romance and the spice. And this one I felt just didn't give me enough of the magic lore when I was genuinely so interested in it. But I do think that there will definitely be people who like this, especially if you like quite low stakes books and you like a mixture of romance and fantasy, then this could be a good option for you. Next up we have Signed, Sealed, Delivered by Juliana Smith. This is an arc I got through NetGalley and is the second in a series, and I hadn't read the first one. I would recommend you read the first one first because there are a lot of characters in this and you would know them from the first one, and this book did not really take time to catch you up, so I would recommend reading the first in the series. This one is about Nathan, who agrees to his brother Luke to let his sister stay with him. And it's basically about him and Calla kind of discovering feelings for each other while they live together. It's cute. It's not my favourite story ever, but I do think that there'll be people that enjoy it, and I would definitely read more in this series. Very much in like the run, the run of arcs and stuff here. But this is Something Wicked by Gretchen Rue. This is about somebody who, I think again, following a breakup, moves to a town where she takes over her aunt's house who's passed away, and their house, something doesn't quite seem right, and then a murder happens and she needs to discover kind of what's going on there. I think a lot of people really enjoyed this. I think I'm in the minority with this being a 3-star for me. Again, if you like those kind of X-Hex, Kiss Curse type books, but you are not as bothered about extensive magical lore in them, then this could be one that you would enjoy. Next up we have Main Character Energy by Jamie Van Ron. I actually think I probably enjoyed Something Wicked more than this, so maybe swap these two over. But this is about somebody who basically always feels kind of put down by other people. She doesn't feel special in her family or with her friends or anything like that. And she really wants to write a book, but her brother is a really famous author, and so she doesn't feel she can do it. But then she gets the opportunity through her aunt, who's passed away, to go to this writing retreat to basically take it over. Her aunt ran this writing retreat, and then she passes it on to this person to inherit and run. And so it's about her figuring out if she's going to do that, whilst also figuring out if she can write her own book. And then there's a really cute guy called Oliver there who also kind of helps to run the writing retreat. And this one is supposed to be about kind of, finding your own main character energy, like learning to love yourself. But I felt like a lot of that was done through, oh, she really dresses up and puts on makeup, and now Oliver is interested in her. And that wasn't quite how it was, but that was sort of how the story made me feel. And so I just don't think I quite got what this book wanted me to get out of it. Next we have The Love Plot by Samantha Young. This is about a vet and somebody who's kind of like I guess she's sort of grown up in a kind of hippie lifestyle called Star, and the vet ends up asking Star to fake date him. I cannot remember why, but they are total opposite personalities, like definitely a grumpy sunshine. And yeah, she's basically like convincing his family that they're together and they fall in love in the process. This is enjoyable enough, I think. It was quite a fun one. It's just not necessarily the most memorable thing I've ever read. Next up we have The Stand-In by Lily Chu. I love the cover of this one. This is a sort of Princess and the Pauper retelling. This is about Grace, who's really struggling in life. She's really struggling for money. She's trying to put her mum in like the best home possible, but she's really struggling to afford that. And she looks exactly like a famous movie star. She is papped at a cafe on a day that she's kind of skiving off work because she really hates her boss, who is like basically kind of sexually assaulting her. And she ends up getting fired because they find out that she was skipping work when she said she was ill or something like that. And then the actress stops Grace in the street and says, can I offer you like $100,000 to basically pretend to be me for a few weeks so that I can have a rest and prepare for this play I'm doing. And it's an interesting idea. The audiobook is on Audible. I think it was free, but I might be wrong, but I think it's worth listening to. It's narrated by Philippa Sue from Hamilton. So I didn't love her as an audiobook narrator, but I think that this story is kind of interesting. I just didn't really feel it was particularly memorable afterwards, but it's okay. Next we have Little Me, My Life from A to Z, which is the biography by Matt Lucas. And I'm just kind of got into my biographies this year. They're really easy to listen to on audiobook, which is one of my preferred ways to read. And obviously I know of Matt Lucas. I think I either got this one for free or really cheap. It wasn't one I used an Audible credit for. And I think it's fine. I think it's really interesting to learn about Matt Lucas's life. He's very honest about when he thinks that he was being a bit of an idiot and stuff like that, so that's kind of interesting. The only downside is, I think, particularly when he's talking about Little Britain, he really doesn't address the fact that a lot of what they did in those sketches are not appropriate now, and I don't think he's particularly apologetic for that, probably because he actually isn't. But I just felt uncomfortable with that, which is why I didn't enjoy this one more. Next up, I've kind of put these two together, which is Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail and Iris Kelly Doesn't Date, which are by Ashley Herring-Blake. It's the second and third in the Bright Falls series, and I wish I loved this romance series as much as everybody else. I really do. But I think there's just something about them that just doesn't work for me. I enjoyed Iris Kelly the most, I have to say, and it might be that this one actually ranks higher, but it was just easier to talk about them together. But I did enjoy Iris Kelly the most. The disappointing thing for Iris Kelly for me was that I was expecting it to be about the fact she makes planners and she shut down the business by the beginning of the third book, and I was just so gutted about that. I did prefer the romance in Iris Kelly to the other ones. I was really interested to see what happened in this series, so I'm really glad I finished it out, and I was really lucky to get the arc for the third book through NetGalley, and I can see why everybody loves this. I just don't understand what's wrong with me that I don't like them more. But it's basically, the three books are about three friends who are finding love through the three different books, basically. They're all sapphic romances, they are all steamy, I think they're a good time. Next up is Robin, which is the fourth graphic novel in the Teen Titans series by Cami Garcia and Gabriel Piccolo. The others are going to rank higher than this, but this one was my least favourite, I think. Either this one or Beast Boy, I don't know, it's kind of hard to rank them, but I love the other one so much. But this is basically a modern day Teen Titans retelling, and I think this series is so worth your time. The art is stunning, the colours are really interesting, I love what they're doing with the story. I can't wait for more in this series. So this is not me not recommending it, because I actually really do. It's just I don't think this one is nearly as strong as others in the series. Also, this is the most recent one and the art is not quite up to the standards. I think that there are additional artists who are helping Gabriel Piccolo by this one, and you can tell that it's not up to the usual standard of these books, so that in my opinion is disappointing. But I still think you should really read this series because it's a really good retelling of the Teen Titans. Next up, I'm going to talk about these two together. So I read all of the Written in the Stars series by Alexandria Bellfleur this year, and I'm going to talk about the second one, Hang the Moon, later in this video. But these two, Written in the Stars and Count Your Lucky Stars, are number 1 and number 3. This is similar to the Bright Falls series, is a queer romance trilogy, and you're basically following a different friend or sibling or something in each book and them getting together. This one's about Elle and Darcy, who go on a date. It goes terribly, but they agree to fake date each other anyway. And then this one is about Margot and Olivia, and they were friends when they were younger, but they had they kind of, you know, drifted apart, but they really, really liked each other when they were younger. And then it's about them rediscovering their relationship with each other. And I think that these two are fine. I think these two are more liked than Hang the Moon, but Hang the Moon is more suited to me. These ones are a lot more kind of grumpy sunshine or that kind of thing. And I just didn't love these ones as much as Hang the Moon. I still have so many books to go. We're going to have to get faster. Next up is Italy Ever After by Leonie Mack. I read this while we were in Italy. That was fun. I think this one might be on Kindle Unlimited. But this one is about a mum and daughter. The daughter goes on a band camp, musical camp, and the mum goes with her and then ends up falling in love with Nick, the music teacher, but it's also about her kind of discovering who she is post a divorce. I think this one is fine. It's fun. Next up, I have Check Please Volume 1 by Nkosi Ugazu. This is a really cute graphic novel series. If you like heart stuff, you'll probably enjoy this. About Bitty, who gets discovered for his ice skating skills and is asked to join the ice hockey team at Samuel University. It's about him moving to university, settling in, dealing with coming out as gay, which he hasn't done in his kind of South hometown. And it's really cute. It's really cute. I enjoyed the second one more, so that'll rate higher in this video, but I think this is a cute series and the art is lovely. It's just particularly in the first one, you don't really learn anything about hockey until the final third, which is all kind of them teaching you about hockey. And if you don't know about hockey, it's really hard to understand the book. So I actually felt like after I'd read this like final bit, which isn't part of the main story, I understood the book a lot more. But that's not really the way that a book should be written, so but in this kind of format. So I think if that had been interspersed in the story, I'd have enjoyed it more. I definitely underestimated how long this would take me to film. That was the first part of my books done. So next up we have Beast Boy in Teen Titans. I've already talked about it, I'm not going to do it again. I didn't enjoy this one as much as the other two, which are still to come in this video. Then I listened to Eragon by Christopher Paolini. This took me nearly a year or over a year or something like that to listen to, because I only listened to it on long car journeys. I did listen to this story on audiobook when I was younger, but I don't think I finished it, so I really wanted to invest in it. It's really long and I thought it would be a good use of an Audible credit. That part is true, but I think that this one does speak to the fact that Paolini was 15 when he wrote this, and this book is in need of some editing. It's like action scene after action scene after action scene, and it was just a bit much for me towards the end. So I would never say never to carrying on with this series, but unfortunately I don't think it will be a priority. Next up we have A Merry Little Meet Cute by Julie Murphy and Sierra Simone. Again, I think I enjoyed this less than most people on BookTube. This is about sex worker B who puts footage of sex online for a living, and she agrees to her producer, who also produces kind of cookie cutter Hallmark movies, that she will star in one. The guy she is starring opposite is an ex-boy band star who she really fancied when she was younger. This is incredibly steamy if you enjoy that kind of thing. It just didn't quite work for me. I felt like the story needed a bit more development for me, but you know, it's a good time. Next up we have A Cuban Girl's Guide to Tea and Tomorrow by Laura Taylor Namey. This is a YA about a girl who moves from somewhere in the US to the UK when she basically has a mental breakdown following a kind of series of things that go wrong while she's at high school. There's like a breakup and a friendship breakdown, and then she's sent by her family to the UK for the summer to basically get over it and try and sort herself out. And while she's there, she meets a guy called Orion who kind of shows around the town, and she discovers that maybe she can have feelings for somebody again and she can find who she is again. I think the idea of this is interesting. It's obviously not aimed at me, I'm not a YA, and so I think that's probably the issue with it for me, but I do think that this is fun and it's one of my favourite covers ever. Next up we have The Dating Plan by Sarah Desai, which I picked up completely random when I ran out of books to read while I was on a trip for work. This is about a fake dating relationship between two friends who then haven't spoken for like 10 years after he just upped and left without telling her where he was going. And it's also a brother's best friend story. She needs somebody to fake date her to get her aunties off her back for trying to set her up with somebody to get married. He needs somebody to get married to so that he can inherit his granddad's distillery. It's like a really bizarre reason why these two need to have a fake marriage, but the steamy scenes are good and I think you can understand why these two kind of like each other. Next up, another YA, which is Well That Was Unexpected by Jessie Q Sutanto. This is about Charlotte and George, who are basically catfished by their parents online, who like are speaking to each other and then agree to meet, and then they actually have to meet each other in person because obviously their parents can't meet. And they agree to fake date because George really needs the publicity to help with some family business stuff. And yeah, it's fun, and I think that the audience would probably really enjoy this, although if I remember rightly, it has a lot of references to things that are from my YA era rather than the current YA era, and I do think that that's a problem in a lot of YAs, and I think this one had that, but it was still enjoyable. Then we have The Impossible Princess by Kira Dominguez. This is one of my favourite covers of all time, drawn by Lena Kaufman, who I just love all her covers. So this is the first book in a series about Princess Clara, who feels like the kind of odd one out in her royal family. She doesn't really get the same royal assignments. She's not trusted with things. She's known as like the party princess. She's finally given a chance to do something herself, and she ends up getting her heel caught in like the cobblestones, and I think his name's Max, who is the like head of the royal guard or something like that, ends up kind of saving her, and then they meet on the sly because they develop feelings for each other. And I love the premise of this. It feels like Princess Diaries for grown-ups, but the downside is that and this is common in a lot of reviews, that people feel like there's a lot of stuff just not included in this book. Like they don't mention things that you kind of expecting, you don't get background, and so that's really disappointing. But the second one for this is in Kindle Unlimited, so I am keen to read that because it's part of my Kindle Unlimited subscription. Next up we have Technically Yours by Denise Williams, which is about a woman who is a CEO for a tech company that does a lot of good sort of helping particularly queer young adults to kind of find their way in tech. I think she's like moved back, or she ends up anyway being kind of back with this guy who she wanted to have a relationship with, but she doesn't believe in love, and that's why ultimately the two of them never settled down, and then she kind of left him when she decided to move away for a new job, but now she's back. He never really stopped having feelings for her. He was always obsessed with her, and so it's about him trying to convince her that they can give it a second go. So it's a second chance romance. I think this was well written. I think the steamy scenes are really good. It's definitely like a cinnamon roll main character, so that was really enjoyable. Would recommend. Next up we have ACOTAR, A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas. I don't think I need to talk about this one because most people know what it is, and if you don't, it's probably because you're not interested in it. I also have a whole reading vlog for this one on my channel where I talk about in depth why I think this is like a 3.5 star, so go check that out. We have This Spells Love by Kate Robb. In this one, woman ends up kissing her best friend. I think this is what happens. Kisses her best friend, regrets it, and asks her grandma to like use her witchy magic to go back in time or something like that. Anyway, it's a kind of alternate universe book where she ends up going into an alternate universe where her and her best friend no longer know each other, and so but other aspects of her life are way better. She has the job she always dreamed of. She like owns her own business. She has everything about her in this life is better, other than she doesn't have her best friend. And it's about her trying to sort of decide which reality she wants to live in. Is it the one where her best friend loves her, or is it the one where she has everything she could ever dream of? It's a really interesting idea, so I would recommend this one, and I got this one as an ARC from NetGalley. Next up we have Kisses and Croissants, which is by Anne-Sophie Johannou. I just picked this up at random. It's a YA about Mia, who goes to a French ballet school. It's a really prestigious ballet school for the summer, and it's about her dealing with being at the ballet school and dealing with the competition that comes with that, and she ends up falling in love with the guy who is the son of one of the teachers at the ballet school. And then it's about the drama of like being serious about ballet but also like finding love and enjoying yourself, and it's cute. This is a good time if you like this kind of YA. It's very Mary-Kate and Ashley if you like that kind of thing. Next up I do here have the like bind up of the Loathe to Love You series, but I am ranking the novellas separately because there's some I enjoyed more than others. So this one I'm including Stuck on You, which is the one where they really hate each other and they're stuck in an elevator together, Sadie and somebody, and they had a one-night stand and then some drama happens and so now they hate each other, but they get stuck in an elevator together, and it's about them kind of like flitting back in time to understand where things went wrong. I just enjoyed this one the least of the three, but I did still enjoy it. Next up we have If the Shoe Fits by Julie Murphy, which is the first in the Meant to Be series. This is the Cinderella retelling, which is about Cindy, who goes on a TV show produced by her stepmom, which is a sort of like Love Island type show. She is invited to go on to like kind of be the plus size person on the show, and she already knows the Prince Charming character. So it's a really interesting dynamic to sort of see if their relationship will work on the show as it did when they met each other on this random flight. I think this one's really enjoyable. It was a really good, interesting take on the Cinderella story, so I enjoyed it. Next up we have Falling Hard for the Royal Guard by Megan Clawson. Megan is a influencer and she lives in the Tower of London, and this book is kind of like her real life story about living in the Tower of London, but with some kind of elements taken liberty of for the romance. And I really enjoyed the idea of this one, but it's a lot less about the romance and it's much more about, what's her name, Maggie, who is kind of trying to like find who she is following a horrible breakup. Typical romance. And I felt like the romance just wasn't enough in this for what I like to read, so I really wanted to enjoy this one more than I did, but I do think you might find this one interesting, especially because it's such a different take on a story. Then we have The Roommate by Rosie Danan. This one is about Clara, who is really in love with her best friend and decides to move across the country to be with him. The second she gets there, he's like, I'm going on tour, bye, live with this stranger. And she ends up finding out that this stranger is a sex worker, and he ends up kind of teaching her a little bit about his industry while she offers to help him kind of go his own way because he's treated really badly by the like TV execs of the show that he's on. So she ends up kind of helping him to launch his own business. This one's very steamy. It's a good time. Then we have Love, Lifts and Fancy Ships by Sarah Grunda Ruiz. I read this one while I was on my cruise in Norway because it's about a small yacht, which is different to a cruise, but it's difficult to find books about cruises. This one is about Jo, who, it's a really tragic book, and I didn't really know that before going into it, but a tragedy happens in her life and she's trying to sort of make the most of it and do this like 30 and 30 list to like live because of the tragedy. And one of them is to kiss a stranger. She kisses this guy called Alex and they keep running back into each other, and so it's about kind of figuring out, actually, is fate trying to intervene here? The only reason I didn't rate this, I think it's really well written and I really like the story, but it was just really depressing at many times, which is why I didn't rate it higher. Then we have Secretly Yours by Tessa Bailey. This is about a girl who works in like a flower shop, I think, and she's been in love with this guy, is it Jonathan, for like years and years. I think her name's Hallie, for years and years and years, and they end up writing secret letters to each other, but the secret letters don't really play into the plot. Like, it felt like a really unnecessary plot trope, to be honest. Like, Tessa Bailey's books are always a little bit on the longer side, and I think in this one it didn't need to be that way because this was just an unnecessary plot point. He's also really attracted to Hallie, though he doesn't necessarily remember who she is, but he does kind of over the course of the time, and then as I say, the letters don't really play into it. Look, if you like really steamy books, I would recommend this, but having read other Tessa Bailey books, this is definitely the weakest of the ones I've read. Okay, that's another pile down and we're on to the 4 stars now. So first up we have Like a Charm by Elle McNichol. I already talked about the sequel, so I'm not going to talk about this one, but I do think the first one is better than the second one and would definitely recommend for a middle grade audience. Then we have Critical Role Vox Machina Origins Volume 1. This is a graphic novel which is based on the Critical Role D&D campaign and the Amazon Prime TV show, neither of which I've watched, but I do like Critical Role. I've watched like clips of a lot of what they do, and I thought this might be a good way for me to get into the series. The art in this is really good, the story's really good. I'm excited to read more. Then we have Volume 2 of Check Please by Nkosi Ugazu. I enjoyed this one more than the first one because I knew a lot more about hockey by the time I got to Volume 2, and I really enjoyed Bitty coming out of his shell more in this one, and also we got a lot more of Jack, the captain, who we meet in the first one's story, and he's kind of dealing with like, is he going to go pro, is he not going to go pro? This was just a good time. Then we have Luck and Last Resorts by Sarah Grunda Ruiz. This is the sequel to Love, Lists and Fancy Ships. This one is about Nina and Oliver, who we do meet in the first one, so you really know them, you're really invested in them by book 2, and they have a very will they won't they relationship. They've been on and off for like 10 years, and finally in this one Oliver's like, Nina, we have to settle down or I'm moving back to Ireland. And it's about Nina figuring out if she can do that and if she can have a relationship with Oliver, because she never wanted to settle down, but she also doesn't know if she can live without him. So yeah, really enjoyed this one. Also the cover, chef's kiss. Then we have Space Boy. So I'm putting Space Boy Volume 2 here because Volume 1 is way higher. So Amy lives on an alien planet and her dad loses his job in the colony there, and so they're forced to move back to Earth. They are frozen in like that same stuff as Han Solo is frozen in Star Wars, and then come back to Earth 30 years later. So she doesn't understand anything about what it's like to live in life at that time. So it's about her kind of settling into life, and I love the artwork in this. I don't really know where the story is going to go, but there are many volumes from here. I loved the first one. I didn't think the second one was as good, but I still really enjoyed it, and I'm very excited to see what is going to going to happen because I don't think I can predict it. Then we have Was It Good For You by Catherine Freeman, which was the first arc that I read from NetGalley. So I do have a video up on my channel reading this. This one is, I'm pretty sure she's also called Sophie, who ranks everything in her life on a spreadsheet. She runs her whole life off this spreadsheet. She accidentally sends the one where she rated the dates she's been in to her whole contact list, and a guy that she rated poorly on a date gets in touch with her and is like, why am I rated so low? I want to try and redeem myself for this. Go on 10 dates with me and let's see if I can get my score higher. So it's an interesting second chance romance. The premise is obviously a little bit silly because sending a spreadsheet like that to your whole contact list seems a little bit out there, but I did really enjoy where this story went, and I think it dealt with, like, we got a lot of background for both the characters. We learned a lot about their life. They both have very rich backstories, which I really like in a romance. So I think this one was really enjoyable. Then we have The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary. I think most people know what this is about. It's a very popular book and is a series on Paramount Plus. Basically, Tiffy needs to move out. I think has a breakup and needs to move out, and she ends up, the only place she can afford is a flat share with a guy who works night shifts called Leon. So she is out during the day at work, so he has the house during the day and then she has it in the evening. It's such an interesting idea. I think it's really well written. They communicate through post-it notes and they don't meet each other until really far through the book, but they have a relationship with each other through these post-it notes. It's a really, really unique idea for a romance, and I think it's a really good time. I would recommend. Next up we have Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is the first in the Brown Sisters trilogy. I still need to read the second and third one, so hopefully I get to those in 2024. This one is about Chloe, who has a chronic illness which kind of stops her from doing a lot of things she wants to do, and she decides she's going to fight through that. She really wants to complete this list of kind of, in some ways, slightly extreme things that she wants to do so that she feels like she's living life, and she gets the superintendent of her flat to help her complete her list, and he's a real cinnamon roll. He really looks after her. He really makes effort to learn about her chronic illness and to take care of her. It's a really cute story, especially for those of us with chronic illness, and it's really steamy. So I'm really interested to see where the story goes from here, because I think most people loved 2 and 3 even more. Next up we have Belladonna by Adeline Grace, which I do have a physical copy of this. I have the beautiful Fairy Loot edition, but it's like trapped behind my spin bike in our conservatory right now, so I also listen to it on audio anyway. So Belladonna is about Signa, who seems to be haunted by death. It follows her everywhere she goes, and the last house that takes her in is this kind of extended family she doesn't really know, and when she's there she meets Death, who basically says to her, you are kind of cursed by death, and that's me, hi. And then she's trying to figure out a kind of mystery that's happening there whilst trying to make sure it's not her that's causing it. And I really enjoyed the audiobook experience for this one. I am interested to read Foxglove, the second one. A lot of people have said they didn't enjoy it as much as Belladonna, so we'll see. But I really think Belladonna is worth reading, especially if you like fantasy romance. Next up we have Below Zero, which is the third novella by Ali Hazelwood in that bind up. And this one is about, she works at NASA, and like they're all kind of the same, like they're all STEM novellas, but I think she works at NASA and the guy is like trying to like interrupt her projects, Hannah I think her name is, stop her projects because he's basically worried about her but doesn't communicate that with her. It's something like that, but I did enjoy this one even if I don't necessarily remember much about it. Then we have This Time It's Real by Anne Liang. This one could potentially be lower. It's really hard to sort of order the books around this part, but this one is a cute fake dating YA romance. So Eliza writes an article for school where she has to talk about like the greatest love she's had, and she makes up this fake boyfriend. The story gets picked up by like BuzzFeed or something, and she ends up going viral, and then she needs to write more for this company that ask her, like basically try and hire her to write for them, and that's her dream job. So she asks Kaz, who is an actor in her class, to agree to fake date her so that she has content to write for her book. It's cute. I love a fake dating romance. Next up we have Legend Born by Tracy Dion. This is a King Arthur retelling about a girl who is really struggling following the death of her mum. She goes to a campus university in a kind of like pre-college program, and things are not quite right there, and she ends up being caught in a group who it turns out are like all descendants of King Arthur and the Round Table. It's so interesting. I've never really read anything like this. but it's very complex. It took me a long time to read because there's so much lore to get your head around, and a lot of the reviews about it are sort of saying it's not particularly accessible to get into, but once you kind of are through it, it's really interesting. I really need to read the second one in this series this year because I'm worried I'm going to forget everything. We have The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This one is a really enjoyable audible listening experience if you want a recommendation for an audiobook. So in this one, Monique is given the chance to write the life story of Evelyn Hugo, who is a ex-Hollywood movie star, and she specifically wants Monique to write it even though they've apparently never met. And it's about Monique figuring out why Evelyn has asked her to be the one to write her story. Like, are these two connected for some reason? But also we get to basically read Evelyn's biography, and I genuinely could have believed Evelyn was a real person. I think that Taylor Jenkins Reid has done such a good job at really making you believe in a real person, and I would love to read more of her books, but I think in general people recommend them as audio experiences, so hopefully I'll get to those in 2024. Next up we have The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore, which I think should possibly be lower in this list, but anyway, imagine these ones are all kind of interchangeable. But this one is, I shouldn't have really enjoyed this one. I don't think that this is by any means the best written book on this list, but I just had a good time. I flew through it. It's about somebody who I think inherits from her grandmother a coffee shop that she has to run, and there's some stuff going wrong with the coffee shop, and she's trying to figure out if somebody's trying to sabotage her whilst also falling in love with like the cute farmer or something like that. I don't know, I enjoyed it at the time. Then we have Front Desk by Kelly Yang. This is about Mia, whose family moved to the US to try and make a better life for themselves, and they buy a motel to run. But there's a lot of problems there. There's a really horrible landlord that they like rent the building from, and lots of things go wrong. And they're also trying to protect some of their family who are trying to immigrate to the US, but maybe don't have the appropriate documents to go there. I think this is a very difficult read for a middle grader, but an important one. It was a really enjoyable story. It's very well written. Mia is very likable. She makes mistakes, but she owns up to them. I'm not sure I feel that this needs to be a series. I will read the second one in the series to see what I think, but I think this one works really well as a standalone, and I would really recommend it, especially for the middle grade audience. Next up we have Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman, and I listened to this one on audio and I really enjoyed the audio experience. I finished the last quarter physically because I had run out of Spotify listening hours, and I much preferred the audio experience for this because the writing style that Richard Osman has is very short sentences. He swaps around plot all the time. Like every time you move on from a chapter, we've moved on to a different plot line, and I did find it really hard to keep up, but the audiobook, in my opinion, makes it slightly easier. But this one is basically about these 4 people who live in an elderly care home who are very interested in solving cold case murders that have kind of been put to rest, but then they end up in a case that is not so cold that they have to deal with. It's an interesting idea. I wish I'd loved this as much as everybody else, but I just found the writing style a little bit challenging, but I am interested to see where the rest of the series goes because I know that it's a really, really loved one. Next up we have The Bride Test by Helen Huang. This is the second in the Kiss Quotient series. I read the last one in 2022 and I enjoyed it, gave it 3 stars, but I much preferred 2 and 3, and I'm going to talk about 3 later in the video. So this one is about Kai, who just doesn't think he will ever really have a romantic relationship. It's not something he really struggles to understand how to be around other people, and so he's not particularly thinking he'll get in a relationship, but he gets set up by his mum, who basically finds a bride for him in another country and pays her to come back and marry Kai or spend the summer with him to see if they can fall in each other. That element of the story is obviously kind of horrible, but it is really interesting to watch these two fall in love. You've got Kai, who's really struggling to be around people and with physical intimacy, and then you've also got the other character who is trying to make a better life for her daughter back at home and her mum, and they all sleep in the same room. And I think it's an important commentary on status and wealth, and as well as being neurodivergent. And yeah, I really recommend this series. Then we have Meet Me in London by Georgia Toffolo. Again, this is one which should potentially be a bit lower, but I just had a good time reading this one. Tori and Oliver basically physically knock into each other on the street, and as an apology, Oliver lets Tori come and have a look around the department store that he's the manager for, and he finds out she's a fashion designer, and he offers for her to have a fashion show there on the agreement that she will fake date him, I believe. And it's not the best written story I've ever read. It's mostly ghostwritten, I think. I don't necessarily think it's by Georgia Toffolo, but I did just enjoy the general idea of this. And there are 3 more in the series where we follow Tori's other friends, and I'm really interested to see what happens with their stories because they are mentioned a lot in this one. It really sets up the sequels, so we'll see what happens with their stories. Then we have Spy Family Volume 1 by Tatsuya Endo. This is a manga about a guy whose secret mission is to try and find out some intelligence about somebody in a school, and so he needs a wife and a daughter to be able to, you know, kind of get in there secretly to be able to have a kind of believable reason to be at this school. And this is the first one where he's like finding the wife and the daughter who don't know why they're being roped into this secret family. It's fun. A lot of people love this series, and I'm interested to see where the story goes because this is a kind of, because I think you could see how this could work as a standalone, but I would be interested to see where it might go from here. And there's like 10 volumes now, I think. Second to last pile, friends, we're getting there. So next up I have Her Royal Spine is the first one. I've already spoken about it, so let's move on. Next I have Skandar and the Unicorn Thief by A.S. Stedman. This was the final book I read in 2023, which I listened to on audio. I do have a physical copy of this with beautiful sprayed edges, but again, it's like in that same bookshelf as Belladonna. This is a middle grade fantasy series about Skandar, who lives on the mainland, but there is an island with unicorn riders, and everybody when they're 13, whether they're an islander or a mainlander, is given the chance to take the hatchery exam, which if they pass, they will then be able to try the hatchery door to see if there is a destined unicorn egg for them. And if there is one, then they get to move to the island to train to become a unicorn rider. And Skandar doesn't quite end up there in the way that he's expecting, but he does end up on the island with his unicorn, Scoundrel's Luck. And it's about him figuring out, actually, why didn't I get here in the traditional way? And it's also him dealing with some guilt he feels over, like, his mum has passed away and his dad suffers from really major depression about that, and his sister really wanted to be a unicorn rider but didn't get the chance. So it's quite a complex story. There's quite a lot going on for a little old Skandar, and I enjoyed this one on audio. The narrator is fun. He has a lot of really fun accents for everybody, so I'm very interested to see where the story goes from here. Next up we have When in Rome by Sarah Adams. This is the first in the When in Rome series. This is about Amelia, who is a pop star, and she just can't do it. She's sick of being on tour. She's so exhausted, and she just needs to escape for a few days, and she's obsessed with the film Roman Holiday with Audrey Hepburn, and so she types in Rome and ends up driving to Rome, Kentucky to escape. Her car breaks down outside the house of grumpy Noah, and he then agrees to let her stay for a little bit while she's getting her car repaired. And while doing so, they fall in love. It's really cute. I really recommend this series. The second one I will talk about as part of this video as well. Then we have The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armez. I finally read it, guys. It is such a long one. I know that a lot of people hate this, and I just didn't. I just enjoyed it, you know. It's basically about Lena, who needs somebody to go back to her home country with her for her sister's wedding, because she's told everyone that she's got this really attractive boyfriend because her ex is going to be there, and she doesn't want everyone to think, oh, poor Lena. And Aaron Blackford, who works with her, keeps saying, I'll do it, but they really argue, kind of think hating game. They don't get on, and so she keeps saying, why would you do that? But it turns out maybe they don't hate each other all along. Look, I'm a sucker for this kind of thing, okay? What can I say? I enjoyed it. We have Set on You by Amy Lee, which is the first in the Influencer series, and I have the second one on this list as well. And I actually have the third as an arc to read soon. Set on You is about Crystal, who is a curvy fitness influencer, and she's in the gym one day, and Scott, this fireman, steals her squat rack. And so it starts off as an enemies to lovers, but there's clearly a lot of unresolved sexual tension there. They end up kissing in the changing rooms, and she hopes she's never going to see him again, but then it turns out their grandparents are getting married, and so they very much have to see each other again. It's fun. I didn't expect to enjoy this as much as I did, but I really did. I really liked Amy Lee's writing. I'm really excited to see anything else that she puts out. I'm going to talk about these two together, which is volume 1 and 2 of I Think Our Son Is Gay by Okura. This is a manga about a boy who doesn't necessarily realise that he might be gay, but his mum has worked it out, but in their culture it's not common to be gay, so she doesn't really know how to discuss it with him, but she really wants to be there for him and be a supportive parent. And it's basically just her observations about him not realising he's gay when he probably is gay. And it's just a really cute series. The art is stunning and I love the little brother. Like, my extra star ratings on whatever I give this, 1 star is for Yuri, the brother, who's just really deadpan and a typical younger brother, and I just love the way that he's portrayed in these. Then we have X's and O's by Amy Lee, the second in the Influencer series. So this one is about Crystal's sister Tara, who, following a horrible breakup, decides that she's going to go back and revisit every romance that she's ever had and see if she can have a second chance romance with them, because she's a book influencer and she thinks that that's, you know, it works in books, why can't it work for her? And she's accompanied on this by Trevor, the fireman, Scott's best friend, who she ends up moving in with when she gets kicked out of Crystal's apartment when her and Scott move in together. And she kind of ends up then realizing that maybe she shouldn't have been looking for kind of second chance romances after all, and maybe who she was living with might have been more suitable. It's fun, I enjoyed it, and it was about book influencers, so even better. Then we have Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams, which is the second in the When in Rome series. This one is about Annie, who's the youngest sister of Noah from the first one. And Annie is kind of known as like Angel Annie. She is, you know, nobody really thinks that she is like old enough to be in relationships, etc. And Amelia's, the pop star from one, her bodyguard, Will, is, you know, tattooed and probably very sexually advanced compared to Annie. And she asks him to not necessarily fake date her, but to kind of teach her how to sort of be more confident with that kind of thing. And he does that. And it's an enjoyable story. My only downside to this one is that Sarah Adams does closed door romances, and these books are completely focused on sexual tension. So it's a really odd thing to have that unresolved part. But she did add an open door sex scene for this as like an extra that you could just read on her website. That is what has kept this book higher, because that is what I needed in the original book. I just don't see the point. Like, be less sexual tension focused if you want to be a closed door romance. It's just a little bit mismatched for me, but if you read that extra bit on her website, then I think that it will help give you the rest of the story that you need for that book. Then I have Window Shopping by Tessa Bailey. This is a novella that I read recently. I really enjoyed this. This is back up there for me for Tessa Bailey. The main character in this is looking at a window of Vivon, this fancy department store, and this random guy is standing next to her and she's insulting this window and saying everything that's wrong with it because she really wants to be a window dresser, but she's just been released from prison and so she can't really get a job at the moment. And Aidan, she doesn't realise, is the manager of the department store, and he wants to offer her the job to dress the windows, but also he really fancies her, and so in part it's he wants to give her another chance, but he also wants to kind of keep her near so he can see if anything would develop between them. And so he runs this interview process to see if she gets the job. She does get the job, and then it's about her kind of dealing with coming out of prison and resettling into society, Aidan dealing with feelings for her whilst also being her boss, whilst also dealing with these challenging relationship with his parents. Like, this is such a rich story for a novella. I really think this one is worth your time, and there's a decent amount of steamy stuff in here as well because it's Tessa Bailey. Then we have Beyond the Wand, which is Tom Felton's biography, which was my favourite biography of the ones that I listened to this year. I think Tom Felton gives a really raw, honest and detailed description of what it's like to be a child actor on a series as big as Harry Potter. He's very honest about his mental health struggles and about the health battles he's had, his addictions. And I just felt that this was an incredibly interesting story. I learned a lot about Tom I didn't already know. I learned a lot about the Harry Potter set, etc., that I didn't already know. And I just think if you are any kind of Harry Potter fan, you will really enjoy this. And I'm very grateful to Tom for writing a book that is as honest as that, which will be read by so many people, because it will, because he's Tom Felton. And I think he addresses mental health in that book in a way that is so raw and honest and important for people to learn more about. And I think, to be honest, that one probably should be rated higher than this, but we're into that top slot 5-y star territory now, and it's really difficult to rank these, so you can kind of just count this as like my 5-star section. So I have volume 4 and 5 of Fence. I'm not sure if I gave both of these 5 stars or either 5 stars, but overall this series is a 5-star. This is about an elite fencing academy who are competing against other elite fencing academies, and it's about the students figuring out who they are and growing up and growing pains and enemies to lovers romance, and it's really fun. The art's lovely. I've read all of the books in this series now, so I'm not sure when we'll get more because they're very slow to release, but I think if you like Heartstopper and you like Check Please, well worth your time picking these up. Then we have You and Me on Vacation by Emily Henry. This one is kind of hard for me to rank because when I read this, and I've watched the clip of me talking about it in the video so many times, I was like, this is definitely my favourite book of the year. This is definitely a 5-star. And I don't remember that much about it. I remember a lot more about the other two. So, but I read this really early in the year, so that might be why, but that's why I've kind of put it around here. But there might be some recency bias for some of the other ones that are coming above this. But this is about Poppy and Alex, who always go on holiday together every summer. And then a couple of summers ago, something happens, which we don't know at the beginning of the book, and they're no longer going on holiday together. But Poppy convinces Alex to go on one last holiday to try and rekindle their relationship. And each kind of chapter, we're going back and seeing the first holiday and then coming back to normal time and then going back forward. And the reveal of what happens is not unexpected. I think you can definitely picture it, but I just really liked the way that Emily Henry wrote Alex and Poppy. They were both so real. I think if you are a millennial, you will really understand what Poppy is dealing with. And whilst I'm an Alex, I felt I could really understand Poppy and I felt really seen by how Poppy was written. So I think this one is well worth your time, and if you've never picked up an Emily Henry book, what are you doing with your life? She is such a talented writer, one of my favourites without a doubt. Hi, excuse the mess behind me, editing cat here, just to say I forgot to talk about Tilly in Technicolor by Maisie Eddings, which is such a shame because I love this book, so I wanted to make sure I included it. This is Maisie Eddings' YA about Tilly, who's going through a diagnosis for becoming neurodivergent, and she just doesn't really know what she wants to do with life. She's just turned 18, she's not sure where she's going, and she ends up interning for her sister and going and spending summer in London. She meets a guy there who kind of helps her to understand maybe some of the stuff she's dealing with. This is such a well-written book. I absolutely loved it. I would really recommend it for adult and YA audiences alike, especially if you like reading neurodivergent stories. I fully recommend this one. And I'm sorry, Tilly, that I forgot to talk about you. And we have Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I listened to this on audio and I would really, really recommend the audiobook for this. I love the audiobook narrators. They did such a good job of bringing this story to life. I didn't read it physically, so I can't really talk about that, but I loved the audiobook experience for this. This is a very, very popular booktube book, so you've probably heard about it, but if you haven't, Iris and Kit both write for the same newspaper, and there is a war going on. Something happens to Iris which makes her decide that she wants to go and be a war correspondent, and so she just up and leaves the newspaper office. And her and Kit have a real rivals to lovers kind of relationship, in that they are really bickering and fighting while they're on the newspaper, but when Iris doesn't turn up for work, Kit's really worried about her and he ends up following her into war where they both become correspondents. And I much enjoyed the first half of this story over the second half. The first half was just absolute perfection. Once we get into the war part of it, I felt like it maybe wasn't as developed as it could be, but we are getting a sequel. Well, it's already out. I already own it, which is Ruthless Vows. So I'm interested to see where the story goes from here, because I think it will focus on these characters, but also focus on other characters. But yeah, I'm very interested. I would like to learn a lot more about the war and about the fantasy here, which I feel like from the shocking thing that happens in like the last chapter of this, we will get in the second one. We're on to the final pile, my friends, and after talking for an hour and a half, my voice hurts, so let's do my final ones. So first up, I'm just going to put Lore Olympus here. I read 3 volumes of Lore Olympus this year. I love this graphic novel series. It's a Hades and Persephone retelling where it's been brought into the modern day. Like Hades runs Underworld Corp rather than necessarily the underworld, and there's cell phones and that kind of thing. It is a very harrowing read at times. It does explore some graphic themes, but it's such an interesting story. I love how all the gods are woven together. It's a real slow burn. If you like slow burn, this is the definition of slow burn, because each of these graphic novels is very chunky and it's a very long time before Hades and Persephone kind of realise their feelings for each other. You can also read this for free. It's a webtoon, so if you don't want to pick up the hardcovers, you can totally read it for free online. I just like owning the hardcovers. It's such an enjoyable reading experience. Also, haven't necessarily rated each edition 5 stars. Overall, this is a 5-star series. Next up, I've put in here Beast Boy Loves Raven, which is the 3rd book in the Teen Titans series, and I really enjoyed this one because I just really enjoyed Raven and Beast Boy kind of figuring out, it's not a spoiler, figuring out their feelings for each other. It maybe we needed a little bit longer to discover that, but it was really cute. This felt back to form after the second one, which was Beast Boy, which I didn't enjoy as much. Then we have The Boyfriend Candidate by Ashley Winstead, which was the 2nd arc that I read from NetGalley this year, and I loved it. This is about a woman who basically is called boring by everybody. I think she's broken up with by somebody who thinks she's really boring. So she decides she's going to go out and have a one-night stand. The person that she picks for this happens to be somebody who's planning to run for a political position, but she doesn't know that. He doesn't tell her that either, and they go to a hotel to sleep together, and then there's a fire alarm, and so he ends up carrying her out of this hotel. The paparazzi have found them and take photos, and in order to try and save his campaign, his publicity team ask if she will fake date him so that they can pretend they've actually had this relationship all along rather than it just being a one-night stand. And so she has to go to all these like publicity things and become really involved in this guy's life when she wasn't expecting to. It was so well written. I really enjoyed it, and I really need to get a physical copy of it actually so that I own one. Next we have Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. This is Ali's YA from this year, which is about Mallory, who used to be a kind of professional youth chess player, but she doesn't play chess anymore, and she ends up being roped into play chess again for a kind of slightly odd reason. And it's about her then dealing with going back to chess whilst hating chess but also loving chess and falling in love with a fellow chess player at the same time. It's typical Ali Hazelwood. It's really well written. It's quite steamy for a YA, but also then not steamy enough for an adult book, so it kind of suffers a little bit in that way. I would say this is really new adult rather than young adult. Like, I don't really think you want like your 13-year-olds reading this, but I think for what it is, it's a really enjoyable story. I've only really ever had one miss from Ali Hazelwood, so I'm glad that this one didn't miss. And you may have noticed we haven't seen Love Theoretically yet in this video. Next up we have The Heart Principle by Helen Huang. This is the final in the Kiss Quotient series. This one is harrowing. It's not really a romance, it's a contemporary, and I think that basically Helen was going through a really tragic thing in her own life and kind of poured that out into this book. For many reasons, this is a lot of people's least favourite in the series because it's so different to the other two, but it's my favourite because I feel like it was just so well written, and I understood what Anna was dealing with in terms of the challenges she feels in her relationship with her family. In this one, I just felt I really got that, I really understood that. And we also have my favourite of the brothers or cousins is in this one, and we know Quan from the first two, but in this one he's had a real turn of events and was just handled so well. I just really enjoyed this book. Next up we have Kiss the Girl by Zoraida Cordova, which is the third in the Meant to Be series, which is the Little Mermaid retelling. Zoraida's writing is so good, and this one was such an interesting retelling of Ariel and Eric. So Ariel is one of a singing family. She's the youngest of these 7 sisters, and their dad pushes and pushes and pushes them to be really successful. And one day she just snaps and doesn't want to do it anymore, and she ends up meeting Eric while queuing in line for something, I think, and then ends up basically running away with him for the night. And then when she gets home, her dad is so angry, rather than stay there and deal with it, she says, no, that's it, I'm done, I'm leaving. And she goes and runs away with Eric on his band tour. It's just such an interesting rewrite of this story, and I really loved it. And I'm very excited for the next one in the series next year, which is Rapunzel, and it's written by Christina Lauren, and I love Christina Lauren. I didn't read any Christina Lauren this year, but I will definitely be reading some next year, and I'm so excited for the Rapunzel one. Next up we have Hang the Moon by Alexandria Belfler. I already spoke about this series, but this is the second one. I love this one. This one has Brendan, Darcy's brother from the first one, who is such a cinnamon roll. Is my preferred for a male main character, and Annie is his best friend from childhood and Darcy's best friend. Annie comes to visit Seattle, where she's going to tell Darcy that she's moving to London, but Darcy isn't there. She's on a holiday with Elle, and so Annie ends up hanging out with Brendan, and Brendan's like, I'll show you the sights of Seattle. And Brendan runs a dating app, and Annie basically says she's fallen out of love with love, and so Brendan is there to kind of show her that she can still love, and it's just adorable. I just really enjoyed this one. Next up we have The Kiss Curse by Erin Sterling. This is the sequel to The X-Hex, which I read last year and really loved as well. This one is about Gwyn and Llewellyn Wells, and Gwen runs the like local magic shop, and Wells lives at home where the family live in Wales, but he ends up making an agreement with his dad that he will move to the town that Gwen lives in to keep an eye on the magic that's there, which you learn a lot about that in the first book. I don't want to go into like massive detail about it. So he agrees that he will go to the town, and him and Gwyn have never really got on, but then they kind of are forced to need to get along in this book. And I just love Erin Sterling's writing. I love these books. I can't wait for The Wedding Wish. I just really enjoy them. And I think that these ones are a really good balance of fantasy and romance. The romance is so well done. They're really easy reads, like really fly through them, but they are really romantic, very steamy, but also you don't feel you're skimping on the fantasy lore, so that's what I really like about them. Next up we have Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. This one is so good, and I was so happy to be, because I really didn't like Love on the Brain, so I was really happy to be back up to like normal Ali with this one. So Elsie is a professor, but she's an adjunct professor, so she makes very little money. So on the side she is a professional fake dater, and the guy that she's fake dating, she agrees to go to a family dinner for him, and Jack is there. And Jack is really off with her, he's really funny, and it turns out that he knows Elsie because he is also a scientist. And so it's about the two of them then figuring out what is going on here, because Elsie's also trying to interview for jobs where Jack is on the panel. He's trying to stop her from getting the job because he thinks she's messing around with her brother, because he doesn't realise that her brother is fake dating her and she's using a fake name, etc. Just a really interesting premise for a story, and it's fake dating done different. It's very steamy, obviously, but we didn't have, like, Elsie is not small, she's like medium sized, like medium height, so that makes it a little bit more bearable than what we have in the other two. But this was just Ali Hazelwood back on form, and I really enjoyed it. Then we have The Holiday Romance by Catherine Walsh, and I think that, to be honest, there's recency bias here with this one because I read it so recently. It probably is a little bit lower than some of these, but I really enjoyed this. This one, the female main character and the male main character always meet at the airport. It's very similar to people we meet on vacation. They meet at the airport every year and they fly home to Ireland together from Chicago. And then on the Christmas that we're focusing on, there's a massive snowstorm and they can't fly home. But the girl is determined to help the guy get home, Andrew, because he's like loves Christmas so much and loves his family so much. And she doesn't love Christmas, but she would do anything for Andrew. And it's about them going on this like ridiculous journey to get home for Christmas, whilst she is realizing that why is it that she would do anything for Andrew. And it does a lot of like going back in time in the way that it does in You and Me on Vacation, where we see the previous flights and then we see this one and how their relationship has developed over time. And I really enjoyed the setting of this one. I really believed in the story. I really believed in these two. I so wanted them to be together. It was just, it's a similar writing style to Ali Hazelwood as well. Very funny, quick, easy to read. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. It probably shouldn't be as high as this though, to be honest. It should probably be a couple lower, but recency bias is meaning that it's this high. Then we have Raven, which is the first in the Teen Titans series, so I don't really need to talk about this one, but this one is my favourite. The art is gorgeous, and I just, every time I like looked at this book, I just loved it. I loved the cover, the colours, I loved the story. I don't know the Teen Titans story that well, but I think this is a really interesting modern take on it, and it's just this beautiful like purple, black and white colour scheme. I think these books are gorgeous, and this one is my favourite. Now it's the final two, friends. So we have Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee. So I finally finished the Greenbone saga. It's only taken me 2 years, and this book took me nearly all of the year to read because I felt really weird about finishing this book. I didn't want to be at a time where I wasn't still reading Jade Legacy, but I am glad I finished it, and it was my 100th book of the year, which was very fun. I can't really talk about this book because it's the third one, but the Greenbone saga is a fantasy series, an urban fantasy about two clans who are fighting for control of jade, which is a substance that enhances martial art abilities. And in the first one, it's kind of just them fighting on that. But then as we get through number 2 and number 3, it gets bigger and it gets more geographically complicated, and you learn a lot more about the characters. And it's this kind of family drama because the characters go through sort of, you follow them for so many years, and Fonda Lee will just kill your favourite characters without any warning. It's brutal, but so well written, it's so enjoyable. And I think it's a really accessible fantasy series despite the size of it. I think that anybody could enjoy this. I think that it's well worth your time if you are interested in this. I've just realised that my favourite bookmark is in here because I actually finished this on Kindle, so let me take out my favourite bookmark so I don't lose it. But yeah, absolutely well worth your time. I'm very glad to have finished this series, and I think that this is a series probably above everything else I have that I would recommend to everybody. And I bought the first one for my dad and my brother last year. And the final book, my friends, I don't think it's any surprise to anyone, which is Heartstopper Volume 5 by Alice Oseman. I love the Heartstopper series. They were my favourite books of last year, and I was worried I wouldn't love number 5 as much because I don't like the Nick and Charlie novella particularly, but I felt like just being back in the graphic novel art with these two was what I really needed. I just love them so much. I love being with these characters. I love the way that we deal with this really honest look at being gay in the UK and being gay at school and how you deal with those challenges. We've kind of reached that point in the series where we've also got to deal with like Nick going to uni and how is Charlie going to cope with that, and that young love and how that's going to influence decisions that are made. And I just think Alice handles this so well, and I am so glad we had another edition of the series. I'm very sad we've only got one more, but it was perfection, so I'm very glad that this was my number 1 book of the year. So that is it. I have been filming for an hour and 40 minutes. I do not ever want to speak again, so I'm gonna go and rest now, but I really hope that you enjoyed me ranking all of my books for 2023. I'm very excited for 2024 content. I'm going to be posting more reading journal videos for 2024. I haven't mentioned any of my stats here. Those will all be in my 2023 reading wrap up, so do go check that out when it's up if you would like to see kind of all my stats about series and all that kind of stuff. That will all be in that video. Do subscribe to my channel if you would like to see any more reading content with me, because I'm hoping to get back into my reading content in 2024. Otherwise, that is it for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed. Give it a like on the way out if you did. Do comment down below as well and let me know what your favourite book of 2023 is, because I am always happy to add more stuff to my TBR. So please let me know what your favourite book is and try and convince me to read it. Also, link down below, I will have a link to my Instagram and my Goodreads if you want to check out any more content from me. But otherwise, I'll see you in my next video. Bye! Wish me luck editing this one.